Okay, it's time for a woodworking video. This is a passion of mine, and I love collecting old woodworking tools. Now, many of you may not be familiar with the Spokeshave. Some of you are, but I'll bet a lot of you are not familiar with the fact that there are a lot of different types of Spokeshaves, different shapes and different forms and different ways. There's the common one that has a flat sole to it, all the way across flat, and it has a little device here to hold the blade in place. And they're all different. Some of them have little twist screws. These have thumb screws. There's a slot in the blade. Every single one of them is different. This one actually, if I pulled the blade out, has a little groove in the blade here. But they all do similar functions, but are distinctly unique. Now the flat one right here is one of my favorites, and this is probably the one that gets used the most because you can use this in a number of ways. You can pull back to do a little bit of sculpting, but if you're doing some round work, you may want to use a different type of a Spokeshave. And you can buy, actually this is an old one, this is a really old Stanley right here. It's a number 67. I don't know if you can see it. There's some interesting things about it. It's got left and right over here put into it, and I don't quite understand what that means, but it has a rounded sole to it rather than a flat sole, which allows you to do more of a sculpting cut. Now, I think a chair maker would like this tool a lot. Here's another interesting Spokeshave that I have. This is a Stanley as well. It's a number 60. And this has both the flat and the curved. So if you're working on something that has some flat sections, you can switch over to the curved sections. Honestly, I don't like this one. I like a single use tool because it's real fussy to get each of these set right. And sometimes you want a blade set a little bit deeper, a little bit shallower, which makes it nice to have multiple Spokeshaves. This is a very interesting one right here. I suppose you'd call this a Spokeshave, but I've never seen this one before. I acquired this, and it's not a Stanley. This is a Neil and Atherton, and it's got a curved blade to it, and it has a little stop right here, and it's got the brass bit over here determines the thickness of the cutting. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is used for edges. This is clearly for really refined work. This is a specialty tool. It wouldn't surprise me to find out this was a luthier's tool of some sort. It's interesting. It was a bad casting right here. They didn't clean this out all the way. But very, very old tool. I've played with it a bit, and I can't really see a wonderful use for this particular tool. It has an area where you can work, so you have to work on very, very narrow pieces of wood. And this brings me to my absolute favorite Spokeshave. This is a really, really old tool that I acquired, and I was told this came from the late 1700s, possibly early 1800s, and it has a brass plate here. That's your wear plate, and it has your knife, your cutting piece right here, and it fits up into this. And the screws, the nuts, I guess you'd call them, the nuts are put into a screwed portion of this steel here that was hand cut. I don't want to pull it all apart, but I have, and it's really interesting. It's kind of crude, but it works pretty well. And you can adjust this by pushing down on it, and then you push down on the two thumbs, and that'll thicken it up, or you can pull it up a little bit and tighten it up, and that creates a thinner adjustment. So honestly, this is my all-time favorite because it's quick and easy to change the thickness of the cutting. But I think what I really like about it the most is the age of the tool. And when I work with this tool, I can feel the hands of the craftsmen of hundreds of years ago. There's a stamp on the end here which has been long, long worn off by the fingers. I have no idea who made this or when it was made. There's some initials on here. BVO. I have no idea who that is from. I do know it was really old because the woman I acquired it from was in her 90s. I've had this tool about 35 years, and she said it was her great-grandfather's tool. So that dates it way back, at least into early 1800s. She said 1700s, and I've looked it up, but I can't really see anything that identifies this tool. So now let me show you a little bit about how a spokeshave is used. Okay, I'm going to use this piece of redwood as an example. I know softwoods were often the woods that were used for sculpting because a lot of this work was for carriages or for parts of the house. And that doesn't mean that you can't use these for hardwoods, but a lot of the work that was done was done quickly with construction type of woods. So what you have to think about, as is any edge cutting tool, is the run out of the grain and the direction of the grain. Now I know it's kind of hard to see on this piece of wood right here, but the grain on this runs out like this and it runs off the edge. So that means if I pull the spokeshave this way, it's going to cause these points right here to open up and tear. So it would be a mistake for me to pull it in this direction. But if I pull it in this direction, it'll make nice, clean, non-tear out cuts. So you always have to look at the wood that you're working with and determine which direction you want to be working. Because the best of tools, even the sharpest of tools, will get you in trouble if you're not paying attention to the direction and the grain run out. Now I was talking a little bit about the thicknesses that you set your spokeshaves at. This one right here is not too hard to adjust because it's got a thumb set screw. You use your fingers to determine the thickness of the blade, how far it protrudes outside of the bed of the tool, and you can feel exactly where it's at and pull it all the way up. They're always a little fussy because you have to tighten them up just so and then do the last little adjustments. And if you don't get it quite right, you're going to either end up with too thick of a shaving, a crooked shaving that goes offside, or you're going to end up with something that doesn't work at all. Now these tools all have their little quirks to them. This particular one has the big slot in the middle, so you have to set it in such a way that the thickness of the shaving is consistent all the way along. Now I usually do that with my thumb and I get a good feel for it, and as you tighten it up, that also flexes the blade a little bit, possibly increasing the cut. And before you start working, you want to make sure that you tighten it up good and firm, because the last thing you need is to start working and then have this move a little bit. So I've rotated this piece of wood so that the grain run out now is going the way that I want it to. So from over on this side over here, the grain runs out over here, and it runs all the way over to this side. So if I started to work over here, the grain would be pulling over here. But on this side of the wood, the grain runs out over on this direction, so I can make nice clean shavings over on this side like this. I don't have it quite deep enough, so let me set it just a little bit deeper. Let's go for a little thicker shaving. And that's not looking good at all. Okay, if you look through here, you can see that I've set the thickness of this to be a little bit more so. And when I work with this tool, I work with my thumbs on these edges, and I pull this toward me in such a way that it keeps the pressure down. Now this one's a little different than some of these others where you set them once and you don't have to touch the adjuster. But this one you have to kind of maintain the pressure of the thickness. So there's pros and cons to both of these. I like it a little bit thicker so I can set it and then hold it and keep working with my fingers like this. and it works very, very good for some quick outside shaping and rounding over. And typically, you don't use a spokeshave for working the long flats of something. You use it more for sculpting. So if I wanted to work on the edges of something and round it up really quickly, I can work around the corner like that. Now let's say I wanted to go to the round over blade over here. The benefit of the round over blade is it'll pull it more to a consistent uniformity on the shape that you're trying to acquire or trying to achieve. But it's not really great for pulling out a lot of volume. So ideally you want to go back to a flat spokeshave and set it up and get a lot of wood off real quick. And once again, you can go for a much thicker cut, adjust it fast. And that's this one right here. Let's see what these other ones are like. This one feels pretty sharp. That one works pretty good. The difference is I don't like the feel of the metal as much as I like the wood. Here's one that I just worked on. I sharpened it and I set it for a thicker shaving. Almost too thick, but it works. So if you're trying to rough something down quickly, this is the tool to use. Well, hope you enjoyed my little foray into working with the Spokeshave. If you don't have one, you should definitely buy one. These are actually available brand new. There's a number of manufacturers that do sell Spokeshaves, but I like something about the history of the tool and the romance of who used it last. BVO. Thanks for watching.